Hi again, welcome back to Truth Fairy Tidbits. I am your Truth Fairy and I am here to give you tidbits of information that you probably wouldn't look at on your own if you are still of the programmed statist mindset, among other things that we'll get into eventually. If you are new here and you haven't seen my videos before, this isn't going to make a lot of sense, so please go back to the beginning of my videos. There's a playlist called Truth Fairy Tidbits. They're not very long. If you want to catch up to what we're doing, or share it with somebody else, like and share and subscribe and all of those fun things. Okay, there's a little bit of reading today, so I'm going to jump right back into it. Here we go. Still reading from The Most Dangerous Superstition by Larkin Rose. I'm going to reread the last video. I accidentally jumped ahead and read a paragraph from this section, so I'm just going to catch us back up from where we left off. Okay. The secret ingredient. In their attempts to justify the existence of a ruling class, government, statists often describe perfectly reasonable, legitimate, useful things and then proclaim them to be government. They may argue that once people cooperate to form an organized system of mutual defense, that's government. Or they claim that when people collectively decide the way things like roads and commerce and property rights will work in their town, that's government. Or they may say that when people pool their resources to do things collectively rather than each individual having to do everything for himself, that is government. None of those statements are true. Such assertions are intended to make government sound like a natural, legitimate, and useful part of human society. Government is not organization, cooperation, or mutual agreement. Countless groups and organizations like supermarkets, football teams, car companies, archery clubs, etc., engage in cooperative, mutually beneficial actions that are not called government because they are not imagined to have the right to rule. And that is the secret ingredient that makes something authority, the supposed right to forcibly control others. Okay. Continuing that explanation, governments do not just evolve out of supermarkets or football teams, nor do they evolve out of people preparing or providing for mutual defense. There is a fundamental difference between how can we effectively defend ourselves and I have the right to rule you. Contrary to what textbooks may claim, governments are not the result of either economics or basic human interaction. They do not just happen as a result of people being civilized and organized. Without the superstition of authority, no amount of cooperation or organization would ever just become government. It requires a drastic change in the public perception for a service provider, whether it is food, shelter, information, protection, or anything else, to transform into a rightful ruler. A system of organization cannot magically become government any more than a security guard can magically become a king. And that fact relates to another false claim of statists, that doing away with government would simply result in violent gangs gaining power, which would in turn become a new government. But unless a new gang is imagined to have the right to rule, it will not be seen as government. The ability to control modern populations depends entirely upon the perceived legitimacy of the would-be rulers. Today, to rule any population of significant size by brute force alone would require an enormous amount of resources. So much so that it would be nearly impossible. The specter of a gang of ruthless thugs taking over a country may make for an entertaining movie, but it cannot actually happen in a country equipped with even basic communications and firearms. The only way to control a large population today is for a would-be ruler to first convince the people that he has the moral right to exert control over them, thereby convincing his victims that he is a legitimate and proper government. And if he can accomplish that, very little actual force will be required for him to acquire and maintain power. With brute force alone will not provide any lasting power. In short, neither gangs nor cooperatives can ever become government unless the people believe that someone has the right to rule them. Once the people as a whole free themselves from the myth of authority, they will not need any revolution to be free. Government will simply cease to exist. Again, politicians and mercenaries who carry out their threats are very real, but without the perceived legitimacy, they are organized as a gang of power-happy thugs, not a government. And I'll just add right here, if people didn't believe that they had the legitimate right to rule over them, they would actually see them for what they are, which is a gang of power-happy thugs. They would be treated as such. It should also be mentioned that some have claimed, including Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, that it is possible and desirable to have a government which does nothing except protect the rights of individuals. But an organization which did that would not be government. Every individual has the right to defend himself and others against attackers. To exercise that right, even through a very organized, large-scale operation, would still not be government any more than an organized, large-scale food production constitutes government. For something to be government, it must by definition do something that the average people do not have the right to do. A government with the same rights as everyone else is not a government any more than the average man on the street is government. Again, they have more rights than we do, imagined. And that is the only thing that makes them a government. They get to do things that you're not allowed to do on your own, magically, because of our beliefs. Okay, one more quick, short paragraph. This is the one I thought that I was reading in the last video. Okay, the excuse of necessity, and this is a major, major problem with statists because they've just never thought past it. The excuse that statists, people who believe in government, often resort to in the end is that humanity requires government, that society needs rulers, and that someone has to be in charge or there would be a constant chaos and bloody mayhem. But necessity, whether real or imagined, cannot make a mythical entity real. A right to rule is not going to come into existence just because we supposedly need it in order to have a peaceful society. No one would argue that Santa must be real because we need him in order for Christmas to work. If authority does not exist, does not and cannot exist, saying that we need it is not only pointless, but obviously untrue. If you jump out of a plane without a parachute, your need for a parachute is not going to make one materialize. By the same token, if it is possible for one person to acquire a right to rule over another, and it is impossible for one person to acquire the obligation to subjugate himself to another, then claiming such things need to happen is an empty argument. Okay, stopping there. So, again, authority is a myth, and it's literally the only thing that keeps the whole scam going, is people believing that government is legitimate and that somehow they magically have a right to rule you and that you somehow have an obligation to obey them. Okay, I hope this is starting to make sense. I'm going to keep it short today and leave it right there, and hopefully I'll get back on another big chapter tomorrow. My brain works, I swear. All right, that's all for today. Have a good one, and as always, I can't see through my glasses. As always, do not comply. Bye.